Bend Your Ear podcast. My name is Frank and I am the host of the show. I discuss and review movies new and old. You can watch the show on YouTube and Facebook under the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. You can listen wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review on the platform you listen to or watch the show on. You can email the show at bendyourearpodcast@gmail.com. Please visit the podcast website at letmebendYourEar.com. All episodes are available there. On this episode, I'm going to review Mad Max Fury Road. Now, I haven't done an older movie in a while, so I'm looking forward to this particular review. And the reason I picked Mad Max Fury Road, two reasons. One, and the main reason is Furiosa is actually opening in a couple of weeks. And I figured, let me review Mad Max Fury Road. I actually have never, well, let me be more specific. I've seen part of the movie before I watched it now for this show. So the movie came out in 2015. So this is how long ago it was. I got it, I think, at a Redbox DVD. So I picked it up because at the time it come out to a lot of acclaim. And I rented it and started watching it late one night. I got like 30 minutes in and just stopped. Not because of the movie itself, just because it was late and I was tired. So I ended up not ever watching it and returning the disc and just never going back to it. So regarding the history of Mad Max, so obviously if you are a movie fan and an action movie fan specifically, you're aware of Australian writer-director George Miller, who's actually had a very interesting career. I haven't reviewed any of his films for the podcast yet, but he's one of those directors that I really admire in the sense that he jumps genres and does films that you wouldn't expect. So obviously early in his career, I believe he started, well, he is, I think he was a medical doctor and then started directing films. So of course, his early famous films were the ones he did with Mel Gibson, Mad Max, followed by The Road Warrior, which was the more popular sequel. And then he did a third film, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, starring him and Tina Turner. Now, that film I actually saw. That's the only Mad Max film I've actually seen before Fury Road. So obviously that's set in a post-apocalyptic time, and I'll get into that more as I get into the review. But as I was saying, George Miller's career is very, very interesting. I always admire directors, especially going back to the early times of film, 50s, 60s, even the 70s. You had what was called I don't know if it's a journeyman director, but a lot of directors, because when the studios ran the movie business, you had directors that were basically coming in to do a job. So this was, before the auteur, method, before the films of the 70s, when you had the great auteurs or the new French New Wave. It was, more director driven than studio driven. When the movie business was more studio driven, the directors were hired hands. And that's not a slight, because there were a ton of talented directors that made fantastic movies under that system. And George Miller, even though he started in the late 70s, his career has been interesting in the sense that he's tackled films that have nothing to do with each other. I don't think George Miller has a particular style, outside of Mad Max, obviously, because he created that world. But, I look at a couple of films, three I can think off the top of my head. So you have Babe, which was the Oscar-nominated film about the pig, the talking pig, which is a fantastic movie. You had one of my favorite movies, Lorenzo's Oil, with Susan Sarandon and Nick Nolte. I'll definitely rewatch that movie and review it for the podcast. It's one of my favorite movies that I think goes way under the radar. I don't think it did very well, but it talks about the true story of a couple that basically developed a medicine to ail their son who was sick, and the doctors couldn't do anything about it. And it's a very good film about the arrogance of the medical industry when faced with someone challenging their authority. And in the current world we live in, that's very apropos. But again, I'll review that for another episode. And then the third film I can think of is Happy Feet, which was the animated Penguin movie. So George Miller's career is very varied, very interesting. And of course, Mad Max is a huge part of it. It's what got him on the world stage as a director. And obviously after Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, I think the thought was probably he was, not going to revisit that world again. But I guess apparently in the intervening years, he had always had ideas to continue the Mad Max film world. And after a lot of fits and starts, especially with Fury Road, he ended up doing it again. And I think his original intention, from what I was reading and background for this show, was that when he was going to start or going to do Fury Road, he wanted to, of course, bring Mel Gibson back as Max. And of course, during this time in the early 2000s, Mel Gibson's struggles are well known. His alcoholism problem, and of course his rant that got him in a lot of trouble and kind of banished from Hollywood for a while. I think he's pretty much back now, but he was definitely persona non grata there for a while. And I think that was during the time that Miller was circling doing Mad Max Fury Road. So he ended up casting Tom Hardy, great actor, in this role, and finally getting the movie made, and it was released in 2015. So it's an interesting kind of backstory for the movie. Like I said, it took a long time for it to get made. There was a lot of delays, a lot of fits and starts to get the movie to the screen. So again, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome being the only one I've seen is, an interesting backdrop for this, because like I said, I've never seen Mad Max and I've never seen The Road Warrior. So at some point I probably will circle back and watch those, dropping in on the third movie. But like I said, I think watching it for me, I didn't really need to see the first two, because obviously his character was so iconic and established by the time that third movie came out that it was, no problem going to see it. And it was an entertaining movie. I think critics and audiences didn't love it as much as the first two. I think I don't know what their issue is with it. Like I said, I can't really compare it to the first two because I didn't see it, but it was enjoyable enough. And like I said, I was surprised to see Miller revisit it. And of course, even more surprised that he was making, or maybe probably less surprised that he's doing a prequel, Furiosa, coming out in a couple of weeks, due to the success of Furiosa. So regarding the plot of Mad Max Fury Road, it's pretty straightforward. That's one of the things about the movie that's great. It's a straightforward plot. So basically, you're set still in this post-apocalyptic world. In the outset of the film, the character Max, again played by Tom Hardy, is out in the middle of the desert, and and if you're familiar with the films, basically it's basically every man for himself, and there's enclaves of people that are kind of huddled together in different areas, and the resources that are common to us are of course scarce and therefore valuable. And in this case, it's fuel, food, water. The basic necessities that we take for granted every day are scarce in this time that the story takes place. So early in the film, Max is captured, and he is haunted by memories and visions that come to him through the film of people that he loves that were killed that he couldn't save. So he's haunted by that. And early in the film, he's captured, and he's taken to a place called the Citadel, and which is run by a warlord named Joe. And Max is basically used as a blood bag. So what that means is, and you see it visually depicted very, very graphically, is there is a sick person in the Citadel named Nux. And basically he is sickly, he's pale, bald, and he uses Max as basically his blood bag, literally. He uses his blood to keep him healthy, to keep him going, and basically that's what he is. So in this Citadel, you have a warlord that runs it, and basically there's a scene early in the film where all the people of the Citadel gather down below. He's way up high, almost like on a mountain. He makes this big speech to the people there and basically releases water, and people of course are scrounging to try to get it. So that's how the film is set up. The world is set back up for there, and then we are introduced to the Imperator Furiosa, which is played by Charlize Theron, and she is sent on a mission by Joe to trade produce for gas and for ammunition. And so she's supposed to go to two different places to get those items. Unbeknownst to Joe and anyone else, Furiosa has smuggled 5 women that are basically Joe's wives. And as you see them in the movie, they're basically pregnancy incubators. So basically, they're impregnated by Joe and have kids to procreate and keep the Citadel going. So that's their only role. So they're basically sexual slaves. They're his wives, but their only purpose is to procreate. They're young women that are fertile, that can procreate. So she is smuggling them out of there so they can escape that life, unbeknownst to the warlord. So, of course, Max is in prison within the Citadel as the blood bag. So she leaves on the mission, and of course, they find out that the wives are gone and are with Furiosa. So, of course, they embark on a mission to go get her, get the wives back. So Nux, the sickly boy who has Max as the blood bag, wants to join the mission. So he goes, of course, Max comes with, and they go to chase Furiosa. That's the basic plot of the movie. It does not get any more complicated than that. And during the course of this film is basically, and I don't mean this as a insult, this is essentially a 2-hour chase film. And I'll get to how that's done and what I think about that in a moment. So as the plot moves forward, the chase is on. Max ends up escaping Nux and attempting to steal the vehicle that Furiosa is in, and fails, but then ends up working with her as they're being chased by Joe and all the other people that are coming to capture, probably kill Furiosa, and also get the wives back. So, again, as I stated, that is the plot. And it is basically a chase film for the entire time. And I remember, like I said earlier, when this film came out, the fantastic reviews that the movie received. I remember that specifically. I remember it being touted as one of the best films of the year, which is why I think I initially grabbed it on DVD to watch. I didn't get to go see it in the theater. And I remembered all the critical acclaim that it had received. And I can tell you right now, it's warranted. The first big surprise of the movie for me is, I think the assumption on my part was that Tom Hardy was the star of the movie. It's a Mad Max film, so Max would be the star. Completely not the case. In this film, Mad Max is a supporting character. The main character in this film is Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron. She is the main character of this film. She drives the story. She drives the action. And really, Mad Max, or Max here, is really just along for the ride. Literally, in the movie and the plot. He is a side character, which I was very surprised. Like I said, I assumed he was the star, but he is definitely the supporting character. This is a movie about Furiosa and her motivations and why she took the wives and why she wants to go, because there's a place she does want to go. She wants to go back home where she grew up before she ended up in the Citadel. So this is a movie about Furiosa. So Charlize Theron, as always, is fantastic. Tom Hardy is great. So they're the two main characters. But again, like I said, this movie is about Furiosa. And the action in this movie is phenomenal. So the thing that's incredible about this movie, and I think that's why people loved it, it's a throwback movie. Well, first of all, if you watch, and like I said, I've seen scenes from Mad Max and scenes from The World Warrior. And like I said, I've seen Beyond Thunderdome entirely. And I shouldn't be that surprised, because the sequences of action, of the vehicle chases, of the battles from vehicle to vehicle were pretty impressive. And even probably so much more impressive back in the late 70s, early 80s, with the lower budgets that Miller had to work with on those films, and as impressive as they are with the minimal money that he probably had at the time. So the thing about that is, and I think he's worked with the same crew probably for a very long time on these films, but in Mad Max Fury Road, the action is staged. There's some unbelievable action in this movie, and the more impressive thing about it is the CGI in this movie is minimal. Most of the most impressive action pieces and things that occur are practical effects, stunt people, just and everything works. The stunt work, the way the action is staged, the cinematography, the music. So again, and I when I was again doing research on this, I know some of the criticism of the film for people that didn't love it as much as others was that it was the plot was thin. It is thin, but the action is so dynamic and so fantastic that I didn't even realize it was mind-blowingly good. And it's funny because I've been reading lately the kind of the story of the week or the last couple of weeks. On a side note, is Quentin Tarantino. So of course, if you are familiar with his work or familiar with the vow he's made for years that he was going to make 10 films and then he was going to retire from directing at least movies. And in the last 4 or 5 months, news had broken that his last film was going to be called The Movie Critic, which was going to be, and I've heard him tell the story about that. It was based on a real person that wrote for a porno mag, but he did serious movie criticism in that porno mag. And Quentin Tarantino read his stuff, was a fan of his, and it influenced him. So he was going to make a film called The Movie Critic, kind of about that, based in the 70s. That was going to be his last film. And then, of course, if you watched in the last 2 or 3 weeks, it broke that he changed his mind. He's not going to make that as his 10th film. And the other thing that Quentin Tarantino does and has said, has been very vocal about, is his assertion that he wanted to get out of making films before he was 60. He's a little bit older than that now. But his opinion is that even great directors, if they continue to direct when they're old, so I don't know if he means 70s, 80s, going into their, twilight years, that he's of the opinion that most of the films that these whatever director that may be do late in their lives are not good, and he doesn't want to be one of those directors. His thing is, I want to have my group of films, drop the mic, be done, and then people go, wow, he was always great. So I don't really agree with that opinion. I can throw a couple of names out there right off the bat. Akira Kurosawa. He directed Ron in 1985. I think he was in his 70s when he made that film, and that film is phenomenal. You can argue about Martin Scorsese. I liked The Irishman a lot. He's had a pretty much late career where he's done whatever he's wanted to, and I did like Killers of the Flower Moon. I guess you can argue, does it match Taxi Driver or Goodfellas or Raging Bull or anything like that? Maybe it doesn't, but I think he's still making films that people want to see. So I think that kind of, I think that kind of disagrees with Quentin Tarantino's theory. Not to say that every director has been successful, but I would throw George Miller onto that list. Watching this film, it's unbelievable. It's basically the same director with a bigger budget, and there's no diminishment in skill with his age. And I don't know exactly how old George Miller is, but he's got to be up there. I'm sure he's older than Tarantino. And it's phenomenal. And like I said, watching Mad Max Fury Road made me excited to see what he's going to do with Furiosa. So again, the action is fantastic. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I was mentioning the plot being thin, but what I can tell you is the third act of the film, and I don't want to give anything away if you haven't seen it. And I know it's been out for a long time, so a lot of you that may listen or watch this podcast have already seen it. But the third act of the film is fantastic. Like, the chase is happening, and then there's a significant event that takes place at the end of the second act, and then it goes into the third act to the end of the film that I loved, and it drives the action all the way through. So I loved it, and I thought it was a fantastic, entertaining, action-packed, well-acted movie, and over the top in a good way. Obviously, if you've seen any of the characterizations of the various people that are living in this time, it would be over the top. Basically, everyone in the world is fighting for water, food, gas, and it's scarce, and it's basically survival of the fittest. So you could obviously see where a place like the Citadel, there's probably citadels all over this landscape of this world that George Miller has created, where there's going to be groups of people that, for the sake of survival, end up following a warlord leader, whatever you want to call them, to protect themselves, keep themselves alive, and exist. So it's a world that's been created by George Miller that he's cultivated through all these decades, and Mad Max Fury Road is a worthy entry into the series. Like I said, I'm glad I finally watched it, and also, like I said, it makes me excited to watch Furiosa. So hopefully I can catch that in the movies and then review it as a bookend to this episode as well. So again, kudos to George Miller, and like I said, his career is very interesting. I didn't even bring up, I forgot, one of my favorite movies from the 80s is The Witches of Eastwick. I think that came out in 87 that he directed as well. That's the Jack Nicholson, Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, and I think Susan Sarandon, where Nicholson plays the devil. And that's a fantastic, entertaining, fun movie. So as I said, George Miller's career has been all kinds of genres, all just interesting, visually interesting, fantastic movies. So again, it's I think people were taken aback when it came out in 2015 just by the sheer muscular filmmaking of a director that's up in age, and just it looks like a young person directed it. It's probably the best compliment I can give. It's amazingly visually stunning, and like I said, the practical stunt work, the work with the cars, there's a and I'm sure the famous image you've seen, there's a way that they have these large stilts, and you see them using the stilts with a person on top of them to go from one vehicle to try to get onto another vehicle, and it's just visually phenomenal. Everything about the movie is fantastic, and like I said, Charlize Theron she's always good, so it's not surprising she's great here. Like I said, Tom Hardy is good, and the acting is good all the way around. Like I said, it's a extended chase sequence that works. It never felt like it was long. It never felt like the action was nonstop. It slowed down for a little bit and then picked right back up. So it's a fantastic, fantastic action film. I highly recommend it if you have not seen it. And I'm glad I finally got around to it 8 years later. It took me long enough, or actually 9 years later, technically. So I'm glad I saw it. So I'm going to go ahead and give Mad Max Fury Road, I'm going to give it 4 stars out of 5. So on that scale, for me, that's an excellent film. That's a film I recommend. That's a film I definitely would watch again. So like I said, it's a worthy entry into the Mad Max series, and like I said, it's really making me look forward to checking out Furiosa, which I believe opens at the end of this month, or at the end of May, which is going to be a prequel, obviously to tell the bigger story of Furiosa. And I think in this movie it's played by Anya, and I always forget her name, Anya Taylor-Joy, I think it is, who was in The Queen's Gambit, The Menu. So she's going to be playing Furiosa, and then Chris Hemsworth of Thor fame is going to be in the film as well. I don't know who his character is, but he's in the film. It's funny, I finally saw the trailer for it, and just a side note, Chris Hemsworth in the trailer, and if you watch or listen to this show, let me know on social media, on my X page. It's at BenJurierPod. He looks exactly like John Travolta, and almost like John Travolta in Battleship Earth. If you remember, he had the long hair, bearded. I thought it was John Travolta for a second. I'm like, John Travolta in this movie? But it's Chris Hemsworth. So like I said, I saw the trailer, looking forward to that. So hopefully I'll be able to check it out in the movies when it opens, and then I will go ahead and review it for the show. So again, I'm going to give Mad Max Fury Road, directed by George Miller, 4 stars out of 5. And thank you for listening to the show. You can follow the podcast on X, Instagram, and YouTube. The handle is at BenJurierPod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the Facebook page. This is a one-man operation. If you're watching the show on Facebook or YouTube and would like to support the podcast, you can click on the QR code here on the top left, or you can go to the show's X page, again at BenJurierPod. Go to the profile page and click on the tip jar. This will help cover the cost of hosting this podcast.